Hi,
Hi.
how are you?
Fine, and you?
Good. Can you introduce yourself to us?
Yes, my name is Daniel Jacobi.
Daniel Jacobi.
That's right. I'm the chairman of the board of Tmura.
Tomorrow.
It's an Israeli organization, a secular Judaism and humanistic organization in the country.
Okay. And what is it? What is your organization trying to do?
We try for the last 15 years to change the society in Israel so it becomes more pluralistic.
Okay.
Our goal is to separate the church from the state
Right.
and to promote secular, meaningful life for Jews in Israel.
And how are you trying to do that?
We do that by three things. One, we have an institute in which we educate secular rabbis, which is not an oxymoron, but it's something very special. It's a 4 years program for people after MA,
After what?
after an MA degree.
Okay.
And they learn in our institute for 4 years, and then they get ordained as secular rabbis.
What does it mean to be a secular rabbi?
It means to have a very vast knowledge in Judaism culture, not as a religion, but as a culture. A culture which is, I would say, 3,500 years old.
Right.
To understand the humanistic side of life and of Judaism the last 200 years, and to be able to lead a community in the country.
Isn't Judaism religious by nature? Like to its very core? Like, isn't it about God and the commandments of God and God's law and the way people live?
Well, until 250 years ago, Judaism was a religion. And since then, a very huge process of secularization was done in the Jewish people. And today, I would say that there are, I don't know, like 4, 5, 6 different ways of being a Jew. You can be an Orthodox, you can be a Reformer Jew, but you can be a secular Jew. And that's according to the tradition of the culture, not the religion. And it's a very ancient culture.
Can you define the line between what it means to be culturally Jewish and religiously Jewish? Like, how could you be culturally Jewish without being religiously Jewish?
Well, that's very easy.
Okay.
I do not believe in God.
Okay.
For me, God is something that people use to justify different ways of living.
Right.
And I'm a Jew because I believe that my ancestors lived here in Israel or Canaan, what it was many years ago, and we left Egypt. Moses took us out of Egypt to be free people.
Allegedly.
Pardon?
Allegedly. Right.
That's correct.
Right.
I don't know if it is, well, I don't know if it really did happen or not.
Right.
But when you believe that something is part of your culture,
Right.
then it's part of your culture, whether it happened or not.
Right. The myth is part of the culture.
The myth is part of the culture,
Okay.
exactly.
Right.
It could be a myth, but it doesn't matter. It's part of my narrative.
Right. I see.
And all the immense working done by Jews along the years, from Moses to Spinoza, Einstein, and today.
So you mentioned there's four different kinds of Jew. You have Orthodox Jew, Reform Jew, secular Jew. Anything else?
Well, conservative and Reconstructionism, and I don't know.
So
maybe others.
why not? Okay, so secular
The
Jew,
difference between us and the others is that we are secular.
right? So
We
they're
believe in Judaism as a culture and not as a religion.
not as a religion. So why not be? Why are you not content with Reform Jew? Why secular Jew rather than the Reform Jew? Is there?
I, let's say, have a lot of respect for all the Judaism different traditions,
Right.
Orthodox, Reform, etc. But we are not a religion. The Reforms, they believe in God.
They believe in God.
They believe in there are several commandments that are done by religion.
Right.
We do not.
Okay, and
We believe in the commands of humanism.
right, and you see, there's an advantage to go, even to be a secular Jew rather than the Reform, because a lot of people argue for a Reform version of religion, but you take it to the next level, to the secular Jew. Do you think that gives you what's the advantage of that compared to just going with Reform Judaism?
Well, I don't really understand the question. I don't see the next as being the next level
Right.
or an advantage. I see as being part of Judaism that believes in humanism, in
Right.
secularity, and not in God or religion, or the people that believe that they represent God.
Right. I guess where I'm going with that is that I personally think what you're doing is superior to being a Reform Jew, because a lot of people think like, oh, if you reform religion, if it's not harmful, it's pretty okay to deal with. But I think we should, as long as people, I rather be on the side of people that believe in no nonsense and no kind of superstition and no gods. So that's why, because at the end of the day, even if you're Reformed, you still believe in certain ideas that are not true, which is going to be harmful to the way that you run things. And that's why I was just going to see if you agree with me on that if you completely shake off all the nonsense. I mean, there's nothing wrong with keeping the culture as long as you don't believe in nonsense.
Well, I could agree with you 100%, except that we don't see what we do as superior to Reform.
Okay.
We are not superior.
Okay.
We are a different way of being a Jew, that really we don't believe in superstition, in nonsense like somebody represents God on earth and says what God would like us to do.
Right.
We do not believe in God. We believe in humanism. We believe in secularism, and in Zionism. We believe that the people of Israel should live where our ancestors used to live 3,000 years ago.
So you consider yourself a Zionist?
Exactly.
Okay, yes. I'm gonna go back to that, but before we go to that, why secular Jew and not atheist Jew? And is it a contradiction to say somebody is an atheist Jew?
Well, in our organization, most of the people are atheists, but some of them are deists. They believe there is a superior power that may be like nature, like Spinoza did, that regulates the world. And that's not being an atheist. But being a secular Jew and an atheist, and it's not exactly the same, but most of our people are atheists.
I would argue Spinoza was not a deist, he was a pantheist. And pantheists technically are atheists. But I see your point. Yeah, you're making room for people that also believe in God, but as long as they think that religion should not have any influence in our political life.
Well, I can agree with you that if God doesn't intervene in your life, so there is a God or there isn't a God, it doesn't mean anything. And I do agree that Spinoza was a pantheist, but that's a philosophical discussion. In real life, we have room for people that believe there is a superpower, as long as we don't have commands that we have to do by religion.
So given a cultural Jew that is not religious, how would you? Is there a way that you could define that? What it means to be a Jew in your eyes? Like, how could you tell somebody's a Jew? Because for you, it's not ethnic and it's not religious. It's just culture, right? How would you Can I become if it's just culture? Can anybody become a Jew?
Okay. Judaism is a special case.
Okay.
It's not like being a Christian. A Christian could be from America, from I don't know, England or Canada or whatever.
Right.
There is I would say, part of the Jews had the participation in the Jewish people, but that's not the only way to become a Jew. According to the tradition, to the Jewish tradition, if my mother is a Jew, I'm a Jew. But that's not the only way to become a Jew. You can become a Jew. What we call to do is a sociological conversion. If you live in Israel, if you live according to the Jewish calendar, and you celebrate the Jewish holidays, etc., and you live like a Jew, for me, you're a Jew. And I don't have to exactly say if you observe the religion or not. If you do not observe the religion, but you observe the culture of the Jew people, and you live here, you're a Jew.
Is that the new thing relatively to the history of Judaism?
Well, we have a brother organization or sister organization, I don't know, in the United States.
Oh, what are they called?
They are called the International Institute for Secular Judaism.
Okay.
They have about 30 communities, and their center is in, I don't remember, Cleveland, I believe. And we are part of this large organization, and they exist in the United States for several decades.
Is there?
Although they are a small movement, of course.
Is part of this because like you're a Zionist and you want equal rights for all citizens of Israel, right? Is part of the attempt to mention that Judaism is not a religion or separated for both religion and ethnicity is to open the door to people that are not Jewish in Israel but are citizens to be able to be considered Jews, like for example Arab Israelis?
Well, that's a thorny question.
Okay.
We believe our humanistic ideas are such that we believe that people are born equal and they have the same rights, no matter if they are Arabs, Jews, or any other people. But since most of the Arabs, not all of them, some of them are Christians, but most of us believe in Muhammad. They believe in their own tradition and their own culture. They are part of another culture. They are not part of the Jewish culture. But if an Arab wants to be a Jew and observe Judaism, for me, he can become a Jew. He can become a Jew.
Okay.
But not as a people, not as all the Arabs in Israel.
An individual basis. Right.
Exactly.
So why, if you are like, why is this insistence on Judaism? Why not promote secularism and humanism? Without, why do we need to insist on keeping Judaism as an identity and as a culture? Why not just have an organization that just supports?
Because we are a people.
Okay.
It's like asking why Greek is not insisting being a Greek. He can become a Canadian. He can, but if he lives in Greece,
right,
and he's part of the Greek culture, he's a Greek.
Right.
If you live in Israel and you're a Jew and you're part of the Jewish culture, you're a Jew. It's not we don't insist in something. It's something natural.
Right. It is part of the activism that you're involved with is a response to the people that think that if you are secular or atheist, you're kind of abandoning your Jewish heritage, and you are fighting against that to show that you could be Jew and secular or atheist at the same time. There's no contradiction, and the insistence on being an organization that is very pro-Jewish and also pro-secularism is to introduce the people here in Israel that there is no contradiction in this. Is that
Exactly. We don't see any contradiction in being Jewish, being secular, and atheist, and being humanistic, of course.
Right. Is atheist? Yeah, go on.
It's like any other person in the world. You can be an American, a secular American, and an atheist, and being humanistic. Because we are a people. We are a people that has a culture, and we see the religion as part of the culture, but not as the culture.
It's a subcategory of the culture, not the entire culture, right? Is atheism seen as something like negative here, mostly in Israel?
Yes, the tradition. Well, Jews in Israel are divided or separated, I would say, according to different traditions.
Right.
Some of them are religious, but a lot of the Israelis are traditional, what is called traditional. They believe in the Jewish religion, but they do not observe it according all of the laws of Orthodox Judaism. And they see that not believing God is against Judaism. And that's the reason why a large part of the Israelis see atheism as something negative.
And how could you change that narrative? Like what is the process?
Well, the process I talked about,
Yeah.
the institute, so we have people that can educate
The rabbis.
the rabbis, they can educate communities. The second leg is the communities. We have about 12 communities called Sikha,
Wow.
which is the acronym for secular Jewish communities, and we organize them as a net, so we have more power of all the communities being together, observing several, I would say, principles. And the third is we instigate projects according to our beliefs. For example, we have a project called Unity Without Uniformity. We are united, we are one people, but we're not of one kind. There are different kinds of Jews in Israel. Judaism is not and never has been of one color, according all the history of the Jews. There were different traditions of Judaism. Until 200 years ago, most of them were religious, but according to today, there are others who are not religious, but we still are Jews. So we want to promote pluralism, and we do projects to do that. We have another project that's called You Should Tell Your Grandson. You know, in Passover, you have to tell your son about living in Egypt, etc. We took this part of the Passover Agadah, and we say you should tell your grandson, which is a program together with the Israel Association of Community Centers for people to celebrate, especially Shabbat, the Saturday, according to the different tradition of Saturday in Judaism, both secular and religious, to make some kind of, I would say, unity within the people here, and to see that there are pluralistic ways of celebrating the same holidays in the country.
So if you abandon your beliefs, you don't have to abandon the rituals and the culture. That's what you're trying to convey.
exactly.
So,
Yes.
because a lot of people might be resistant to being atheist or secular because they might think that this is an abandonment of their people, of their history, of their culture. But you're trying to show them that you could change it. You could be secular or
We
atheist.
talk about unity.
Yeah, right. But is there? You mentioned there are some. You're suggesting rituals that to replace the religious rituals with secular ones, right? So can you give us some example of some of the rituals?
Well, Saturdays, they say,
That one is one.
there is a religious way of celebrating Saturday.
Right.
And we have a different way of celebrating Saturday with songs which are seculars, with sayings that based on secular humanistic ideas, and not according to what you have to say according to the tradition to celebrate Saturday.
Do you see what? Do you see any similarities between this and anything what atheists and secular people are doing that come out of a Christian tradition or Islamic tradition, or is this different when it comes to Judaism? Like, what is it? Like, for example, a lot of people like myself, we call ourselves ex-Muslim or ex-Jehovah Witness or ex-Mormon. I even see many people might mention ex-Christian. Is it, but ex-Jew, like the way you're explaining what it means to be a Jew, then that would not apply to somebody that is an atheist that used to be religious? Like, they're not, in your eyes, they're not ex-Jewish, they're still Jewish.
Yes.
So what would you say to somebody that what's the difference between, somebody that used to be religious Jew and it's not? Like, what's the difference? You're saying that you could be culturally Jewish, but why is it that we don't see that with Christianity and Islam, but we see that with Judaism? Why does that make it special?
Well, I'm not sure, I'm not really aware of how ex-Christians believe in Christianity or do not believe in Christianity. I really don't really know. But for a Jew to be a Jew is being part of the people. It's not being part of the religion. So I don't see the problem.
Right.
He's part of the people. They observe the culture of the Jewish people as it was many, many years ago and as it is today. But they are not religious. So I don't really see the problem.
Yeah, I just...
In the way I think, I don't see the problem.
Yeah.
Others see a problem.
I just, what is interesting to me is that it's very similar to people that, this conversation is very similar to people that have left Hinduism. They used to believe Hinduism. Like when Christians leave Christianity or when Muslims leave Islam, most of the time they don't consider themselves Christian anymore or Muslim anymore. But within the Jewish community and within the Hindu community, when they stop believing in their religion, there's a debate on whether they're still Jewish or still Hindu, or are they ex-Jews and ex-Hindus?
Well, actually, I could ask you, is Hinduism a religion?
I guess that's the similarity between Hinduism and Judaism, that's the discussion to be had.
Hinduism, as long as I know, Hinduism is not a religion. It's a way of thinking. It's a very old one. It's a very interesting one. I learned some Hinduism because it was I was very curious about Hinduism. But if I believe that Judaism is not a religion, it's a culture of the Jewish people, so I can leave the Jewish people if I do not want to be a Jew. But if I'm part of the Jewish people, I cannot be an ex-Jew. I believe in the culture of the Jewish people. This country was founded on the idea that every people is entitled to have a country. So there is a Jewish country here that was decided in the United Nations in 1947. A Jewish country for the Jewish people, not for a Jewish religion.
For Jewish people, not for Jewish religion. My tier. Let me know what you think about this, because my guess is that Judaism and Hinduism have a much longer history than Christianity and Islam. And when you look at ancient religions before Christianity and Islam, they were religions for a specific group of people. Christianity and Islam became universal religions that was not for, it could be for anybody. It was not for a certain country or certain race. And I think that maybe the difference is that if the religion was for a specific group of people, it became such a big part of their identity that it went beyond just being religion. It got merged more with culture and more with a sense of identity that it's hard to separate anymore, right? Kind of like Zoroastrianism was for Iran, or the Egyptian gods were for Egypt. So Judaism was for the Jewish people, and I think that might be the difference. That it's hard to draw the line between where does the religion start, where does the religion end and the people begin, and because that's a blurry line, that makes it different from Islam and Christianity. Is that something that you could?
Well, perhaps you're right. I haven't investigated this angle
Right.
of the difference between Judaism and other religions many years ago. I haven't done it, so I'm not sure, but perhaps I can agree. But think about this. We all used to live here in Israel until 2,000 years ago, trying to elaborate on the difference between the Jewish people and other peoples.
Right. So you're saying 2,000 years
Something that didn't happen to other peoples.
Right.
Different ways of evolution.
Right.
So 2,000 years ago, the Romans destroyed the temple, and the Jewish people were scattered around the world, what used to be the world of those days. Europe and Africa and part of Asia, and all of them were still Jews. They observed the same religion. Religion was really a part of the culture, and all of them saw themselves as Jews that are observing the same religion. The traditions were different between different communities. There's a community in Yemen, a community in Iraq, and a community in Spain or in Germany. It wasn't Germany in those days, but in this area, they didn't have the same traditions, but they observed the same religion. And it happened for 2,000 years. And there weren't many changes in the religion, but were many changes in traditions around the different communities. But all of them were Jews. Until, as I said before, 200, 250 years ago, it started a process of secularity in the Jewish people, like in all the world. I don't see any other people with a similar history that had so many problems, being in so many communities around the world, and still be part of one people.
Right.
So that's a big difference in the history, the traditions, and the culture of the Jewish people versus other ways of being a people.
So I guess the difference is that there were other people that were, dispersed around geographies, but what happened to them was that they disappeared as a culture. But for some reason, the Jewish people managed to, even though after they lost their land and they were all over the globe, somehow they managed to still be united and keep their identity, which is...
I am not sure they were really united, but they keep their identity.
Right. Which for that time is very amazing, given that they weren't connected, but they still managed to...
Well, on that I did some work, and they were connected.
They were connected?
Yes. And the connection was the merchants. Jewish merchants that traveled all around the world. And the main reason was that Jews are taught to read and write since 4 or 5 years old.
Which was unique for that time. Most people didn't know how to read and write. Yeah.
It was very unique. So they could establish a real network of Jewish merchants all around the world by written words, by written contracts, and they pass things from one community to another all around the world. And I try to study this phenomenon according to the network, social networks concept. And it's really interesting how these communities in the first 1,000 years after destruction of the temple were connected according to this network of merchants that traveled from Spain to India.
Right. One thing I wanted to make sure I ask before I forget, like I mentioned, like one of my friends identifies as an ex-Jew. If somebody wants to say, like, you know what, I'm an ex-Jew, I'm not Jewish anymore. If I'm an atheist, I don't want to identify as Jewish anymore. Do you think that, would you still identify them as a Jew, or no?
Identity is a personal issue.
Right.
If he doesn't identify himself as a Jew, he's not a Jew.
He's not a Jew. And then, if an Arab Israeli citizen says, I identify as a Jew, an ex-Muslim Arab...
I elaborated on that. If he says, I am a Jew, but he lives as a Muslim, he's not a Jew.
He's not a Jew.
But if he says, I am a Jew, and I observe the Jewish secular tradition, secular culture, the Jewish calendar of holidays, etc., he's a Jew for me.
Why is it?
And for me, it's not a question whether he is an Arab or an American or a Russian. It's a question of identity. If he says he's a Jew and he does what they said, he's a Jew for me.
What is the importance of, it seems, following the calendar, observing the holidays and the traditions? Why is that important to have?
That's part of culture.
And why is it important to keep that? What is it?
That's part of our narrative. You can live in the United States and say, I am an American citizen, but I do not observe nothing from the American tradition, like Thanksgiving, which is not a religious holiday. Then what it means to be an American, that you live there. So you can be an Israeli and you live in Israel, but if you don't observe nothing from the Jewish culture, you're an Israeli that is not a Jew.
But would you see it as a tragedy if the Jewish culture disappears?
Yes, of course. That's the narrative of my people. I want my people to exist.
Well, if the people continue to exist but without observing the culture, why can't, you say you want your people to exist, but if they stop observing the culture, are they going to stop existing?
Well, persons will do not stop to exist, but the Jewish people will stop to exist.
And why is that a bad thing?
For me, it's because you're asking me if, let's say, I don't know, the Italians, okay?
Right.
If the Italians they live in Italy, but they do not believe in the Italy culture, Italy tradition, is that a tragedy? Go and ask them. I believe that Italians are proud of the history of what the Romans have done, etc., etc., etc. For me, it's the same thing.
They would probably say yes, it would be a tragedy, but I think I just, when I ask why, I don't get it, because if you look at throughout history, many cultures disappeared and was replaced by new cultures, right? It's not like there's not going to be a culture, it's just some cultures die and then new cultures are born. Why is it that if a culture dies...
But why I have to think about my culture to disappear when I believe that it's a very important culture that have given the world Saturday. It's the first and only people that they didn't work one day a week. People used to work 7 days a week, 365 days a year
Right.
in the ancient world. The people, the Israeli culture says, love thy neighbor as thyself. That's part of humanism from 2,000 years ago. So that's a very important tradition that I believe in its narrative. Why do I have to think? For me, it's a tragedy if that doesn't continue.
Okay, but we cultures that are dead now, also they're not around anymore. But we took a lot of things from them that we kept, even though the cultures are not around anymore. And maybe new cultures, if they replace old cultures,
Give
they
me
could
an
also.
example.
Like Valentine's Day, for example, comes from Roman
That's
culture.
not a tradition. That is not a culture. That's a celebration that you can celebrate or not celebrate. But if you speak about the
Easter, for example, like
Easter-
hiding eggs, comes from like the
It-
part of
those
it's Christianity,
are
but
tra-
eggs and bunnies come
those
from.
are traditions. I'm talking
Right.
about something much more profound,
Right.
something which is in the core of the believings of people. If you talk about Hinduism, that's really a culture. For me, it's a religion, as long as I understand Hinduism. And you look at the Greek, they have really a culture that has given the world democracy, etc., and philosophy, etc. So, will the Greek tradition disappear? Or I'm not talking about holidays. We're talking about tradition.
Okay, so for example, the Greeks gave us an understanding of democracy, for example, but the Greek traditions do not exist anymore. But we took that from them, and we still have that.
I do believe that the Greek people believe in their culture, in their narrative.
Right.
If you ask a Greek whether he's part of ancient Greece, he will say yes, because that's what they believe.
So you don't think that there's a way that we could come up with ways of living and values that are beneficial to humanity without relying on culture?
No,
You
not
don't
at
think
all.
so? Okay.
For me, it doesn't exist. Every person lives within a certain culture, and he's part of the culture, and he was educated according to this culture, and he can change his culture, but he is a part of the culture.
So-
I don't think that people exist outside of cultures.
Right. So
Why they live in the woods, I don't know.
So if you define culture like that, that would become, a bigger category than I thought. But for example, like if you look at Europe, Western Europe in the 1800s and stuff, the Enlightenment values that came out of it from philosopher, right? They came up with a lot of ideas that we benefit from today: freedom of speech, due process, human rights. It wasn't based on an ancient tradition and history and a way of practice that it was based on some philosophers, some people logically thinking what benefits humanity and coming up with the conclusion that all of us are benefiting from. Why, given the amount of great ideas that came out of a small group of people in a short amount of time, without relying on history and tradition, why can't we keep doing that? It seems like the good ideas that we get from cultures that are based on history is like few and far between. Like we could point to things that benefit us, but Saturday, what else?
Well, actually, you insinuate that the Jewish culture has frozen, and that's not the situation. The Jewish culture has evolved according to Enlightenment, and there are many Jews that made great things in the last 200, 150 years, as I say, and the culture evolves. It's part. The culture changes along the years, as any other culture. So it's not focusing on ancient traditions. The tradition is 3,500 years old, and it's also one day old. Because maybe yesterday some person made a very great masterpiece on something that will be part of our culture in the next years.
So I guess the way I look at it is culture refers to two separate group of ideas that we think. One of them is dance, art, food, clothing. That's one side of culture, which is more about fun and enjoyment, and but the other one is values and ways of living. The first category, I don't see any issue with observing culture, evolving culture, changing culture, because it's just about enjoying certain way, enjoying art and food. But when it comes to ways of living and values that we need to adopt, if the labeling of it, if it's Jew or Islamic culture or Christian culture or Hindu culture, to me it seems like it anchors it to the past and slows down its progress.
That's your problem. It's not my problem.
But you disagree with that?
I disagree. I completely disagree because, as I say, culture has not frozen. Culture is changing every moment, every second. That's one thing. The second, we see another pillar of our beliefs is humanism.
Right.
And we combine humanism with Judaism. And we combine secularity with humanism. So the culture is much more wide than ancient values. It's the values, it's ancient values that suit the today's thinking, modern values, and values which are universal. So that's part of the whole tradition or the whole culture that we instigate in Israel as plurality of thinking. So for me, the culture is much more wide than the ancient values.
Right.
It's all the things combined.
Okay. Just one last pushback on that, and I'll move on. I'm sorry. This is but the thing is, if your definition of a Jewish culture is so broad that it's changing and so new every day, it seems like it keeps evolving every day. Doesn't it seem like the definition for it is so loose that it would lose its meaning altogether if it's that loose?
Not at all.
No?
Because I'm talking about one narrative. My ancestors were Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Whether it is
Allegedly.
a myth,
Right? Yeah.
whether it is a myth or not, it
Right.
doesn't matter. It's part of my narrative.
Part of your narrative.
So
Okay.
the narrative is a Jewish narrative. The values are the values that evolved along the years.
Right. One thing I wanted to touch on is that I constantly hear this argument. People say that Israel needs to be either a Jewish state or a democracy. It cannot be both. Do you understand? Do you know that? Have you heard that before?
Of course I did.
Okay. What are your
And
thoughts?
the
on that?
answer has been done many, many times. We are a Jewish democratic country.
Right.
We believe in rights for everyone, men and women. We believe in democracy. We believe in elections, etc. And we are a country for the Jewish people.
But
Like Italy is a country for the Italians.
do you think that the non-Jewish people will be seen as second-class citizens if Israel is a Jewish state?
Well, that's a danger that has to be eliminated in this country, and that's part of what we believe, that we should educate people to see Judaism as a culture which sees everyone equal, and not as a religion that if you are not a religious person, you are not equal to the Jews.
But what if I don't observe the culture either, and I'm an Israeli citizen? If we keep saying Israel is a Jewish state, I feel like I'm being told like this is not my country, that I don't belong here, that I'm a second-class citizen.
So
And you agree with that? If somebody doesn't observe the culture, that they're not part, do you still consider them part of this country?
of course.
And so what would you, let's say for example I'm an Israeli citizen and let's say I'm an Arab, I don't observe the culture. I'm telling you that if you say
That's part of the head. Well, I think that I don't really understand your point of view.
okay,
If people are equal, and if it's a democracy, every citizen has the same rights as the other citizens. So what is the problem? If he's a Christian, he's a Muslim, or a Jew, they have the same rights.
right,
They pay taxes, they get what they get from the government, they go to the school, they work here, they participate in elections. If you're asking me if there are people that thinks that not Jewish are second grade, yes, they are. Should I tell you about what white people in the southern part of America thinks about Afro-Americans? There are people in the United States that don't see the Afro-Americans as equal to them. So what?
Right.
It means that America is not a democracy?
right. So, but okay, so you see that as something that is true, but it's a problem that other countries have as well. And
No,
that-
what I see is that there is a minority that thinks that Arabs are not equal, and that minority doesn't govern the country.
Okay, so you're saying there are people here in Israel that do see Arabs as a second-class citizens, but they're not they don't represent most of Israel.
Exactly. And there are other countries where minorities think different things than what the country is.
You mentioned these rabbis that you're educating. Are they? Do we have atheist rabbis? Is that a thing? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain how is that possible to be an atheist?
Rabbi is a title.
Right.
Can be a professor or an atheist? Yes. Rabbi is a title for leading communities, for educating according to the Jewish
Culture.
traditions and culture. It's a title. It's not a denomination.
I really would like to meet an atheist rabbi and see what the.
You are meeting one.
Oh, you are a rabbi.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Not in 2 months, in several months I'll be a rabbi.
Oh, in 7. Well,
You already finished my learning.
well, congratulations in advance. You mentioned the 4 pillars of your organization before we were recording. Do you mind mentioning it again? The 4 pillars.
Yes. One pillar is Judaism as a culture.
Right.
The second is secularity.
Right.
The third is humanism. That human beings are born equal. And the fourth is Zionism.
Zionism.
Yes, a Jewish country for the Jewish people.
Jewish people. So is there a difference between saying that Israel is a country for the Jewish people and saying Israel is a Jewish state? Or because some people say, like, I say Israel is for the Jewish people, but I won't go and say Israel is a Jewish state. Is there a difference? I don't understand the difference really.
Well, you should read the Declaration of Independence
Right.
of Israel of 1948. It says that we are a Jewish country,
Right.
and all other people are equal, men and women, different religions, etc.
Right. And Zionism, like a lot of people outside of Israel, when they think about Zionism, they think about something religious. But
Religion was secular right from the beginning until the end.
from the beginning. In fact, the founder of Zionism, he himself was
I know there wasn't one founder, there were several,
Okay.
and all of them were secular.
all of them were secular.
All of them were secular. Not most of them, I would say. The vast majority of them were secular, and kibbutzim were established I would say, starting almost 100 years ago. They were secular.
Is there something within you in the United States? You have the separation of church and state. In your declaration, of Israel as a state, is there something also similar that separates the power? No.
No. There is one thing that that's part of one, maybe the major mistake of Ben Gurion. and there is one thing. The religious people came to Ben Gurion after the country was established because nothing is written in the Declaration of Independence on that. And they say that, and they demanded that the laws according for marriage and divorce should be kept as they were during the British Mandate. And during the British Mandate, these laws were the laws of religion for every people that lived here in Israel. The Muslim was according to the Sharia,
right,
and the Jews was according to the religion, and Christians according to the church, etc. And that's the main mistake of Ben Gurion for coalition, in order to have a coalition, he accepted their demand. And the law of marriage and divorce is according to the Orthodox tradition.
right.
And for that, the church is not separated from the state.
So that was like the opening for them to get involved in everything else. Like when
I wouldn't say in everything. They are involved in that.
Right.
In other things, it's a question of politics.
Right.
It's not a question of religion or the state.
And is this why we have Sharia courts here in Israel? Government-funded Sharia courts? This is something a lot of people would be shocked to hear, I mean, outside of Israel, that because a lot of people see Israel as anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, but we have...
That's part of the law.
Yeah, but we have government-funded Sharia courts in Israel. That was mind-blowing to me when I found it. I mean,
yes.
Yeah. So, is religion these days becoming more influential in politics, less influential? What's the direction?
The influence of religion in the country is according to politics, nothing to do about principles. Because today, the Likud needs religious parties to be part of their coalition. They give them a lot of favors and influence.
Right.
If tomorrow, and that wouldn't happen, but if tomorrow the religious parties will not be part of the coalition, they will have less influence.
Is that something like people like you are fighting against to reduce the influence of religion in politics?
Yes.
And have you made progress in that?
No.
No? Okay. Well, then how could people support? Because this is something that we need to help you, people that are concerned about the influence of religion in Israeli politics.
But, politics and money are more strong than any ideals.
Right. But so why are you mentioned that you're an apolitical organization and you do not want to become a political?
No.
Why?
Because in our organization there are people that are part of the right-wing part of the politics, of left-wing part of politics, because people believe in different ways of thinking in economy, in defense, in other things, not only in religion.
But you want to influence politics?
We want to influence politics, but not to be part of a party.
Not to be part of it. Okay. And how can people support your organization if they feel like this is something that they want to get behind?
People that believe in our 4 pillars support us. People that do not believe. We are not a big organization because it's difficult to believe in these 4 things
at the same time.
Right. It's very difficult.
So are you a minority right now? The people that you think that you could be Zionists and support secularism, humanism, and Zionism?
We are a minority.
You are a minority?
Yes.
A growing minority?
Yes, but not as fast as I would like to be.
Okay. Well, where can people find you online, on your website to come? Do you have like a ways to support you on your website?
We have a website that you can make, yes.
Okay, so what's the website?
The website is judaism.org.il.
Judaism.org.il. Okay, Judaism.org.il. I'll make sure like we put like a link to that in the description. Is there anything that you really wanted to mention that I didn't ask about?
You asked about a lot of things. Some of them I do agree, some of them I disagree.
Right.
But I think that's been interesting.
Okay, great. How much time is it? Is it around?
I would like to just finish it
Okay,
if
good.
it's possible.
Oh, well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you. All right.
Atheists are under attack in many places. If they were Christians, their voices would be heard. If they were Jews, their voices would be heard. If they were Muslims, their voices would be heard. But they are atheists, and not many seem to be listening. Let's make it difficult for them to ignore us. We have built a global community, and now we are tearing down geographic, cultural, and language barriers so we can find each other and support each other. In the last decade, we have built the largest atheist community in the world. Now we're doing the same in other languages. With your help, we have started Atheist Republic in Persian and Arabic.
انضميت مؤخراً لأسرة Atheist Republic وحيصير عندي بودكاست باللغة العربية.
As we grow, we can dedicate more time, staff, and resources to start doing the same in Spanish, Portuguese, Malay, Bengali, Urdu, Hindi, and other languages. We are providing community, support, informative content, and amplifying the voices of those who need protection, especially in countries where people feel isolated simply for their lack of belief. We want to be there for them, and we are only getting started. Help us get there. Check in the description for ways you can support our projects.